2020 was a tumultuous year. The question we must all ask going forward is simple. What values, ethics, and behaviors from the old world are we going to preserve? And what new perspectives are we going to embrace as we build our future civilizations? This is the New World Podcast with Ariz Kaki and Akil Samji.
Welcome to the second installment of the Gen Z series here on the New World Podcast. This is a series dedicated to highlighting and acknowledging leaders and breakthrough individuals in various fields and disciplines that are working on some amazing projects at companies or at organizations. My name is Ariz Kaki.
And my name is Akil Samji.
Our guest today is a self-taught developer and self-educational extraordinaire. Mohammed Ibrahim currently attends Ryerson for computer engineering and works at Shopify as an iOS developer. He has made self-education and the continual upgrading of his skills as a top priority in his career. Often considered a cliche, Mohammed will explain to us why networking and marketing yourself as a branded developer or freelancer can land you amazing positions in high-quality companies. With that all said, we'd like to welcome Mohammed Ibrahim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So to start off, we want to say, just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything we missed or anything you want to add or tell our audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm I started off as a web developer. I've been programming since middle school, really. And more recently, I've been really into kind of mobile applications, specifically for Apple platforms. And I love designing, developing. I love working really closely with the user and making like completed products, really. And recently, I've been interning at Shopify, and that's been really good. The first term just ended, and yeah.
How long have you been working at Shopify?
Yeah, so the internship starts at September, I think September 8th, and it ends December 18th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And have you what other previous positions have you been in, or placements prior to?
So I've actually never. This was the first company I've ever worked in, any big corporation, really. Mm-hmm. I've worked as a freelancer for multiple years, and I worked at a startup momentarily. And that definitely helped me kind of learn by doing, I guess. Mm-hmm. But this was the first, serious position that I've had, which was,
Mm-hmm. Like paid, right? This is the first, also like a major pay upgrade, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and then also major, I guess, it's the best position I've had thus far, for sure. And the first job contract that I ever had too.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So speaking as we all went to the same high school.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that had any relevance to the job you're in now?
So in middle school, I wasn't really thinking about kind of self-education or kind of working on my own on the side. It was kind of, I thought I'd wait until I got university, do really well, and then kind of get those positions. But as I entered high school, I started being more disconnected from school, really. And I'm not really saying that's a good thing. It's just kind of how it happened, because I got into kind of website development and app development. I just consumed most of my time. And I think that helped more just kind of building that experience on the side, and actually building things. I think that helped a lot more than the whatever I learned in school, really.
Yeah. So going from high school, from that perspective, from the high school stream, you just said that you felt this weird disconnect. Could you specify where and do you mean in the academic realm? Because for most people of your caliber, often it's a weird standard practice for some people like yourself to be okay, I'm just gonna dedicate less time to mainstream academia at high school. Instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spend majority of my time building up my portfolio, doing the whole university application thing, which is standard practice, and then gonna see from there if I'm able to score an opportunity, I'm gonna take it, a big time opportunity, we're talking the ones that you hear as success stories or whatever. Do you see that disconnect happening in STEM related fields? Because all of us are in STEM related fields at the moment in terms of our post-secondary, most of our interests lie in STEM, even though they're different. Do you see that happening? Like the disconnect from calculus class, the idea that you needed calculus or calculus is mainstream thing for any STEM field to be in biological sciences, life sciences, physical sciences, engineering, or as a iOS developer at Shopify. Did you see that disconnect there?
So what you're asking me is like, was it the individual courses that I was kind of drawn away from?
Yeah, like was it like the pure academic side, and more specifically like courses that you were kind of labeled to take, part of your university pathway? But then did you see that disconnect over there as well?
So yeah, so just I guess an anecdote. Like I said, in middle school, I only expected to really do well in school. And then when I started doing this web developer stuff and learning on my own, whenever I went to school and I took, again, like these courses that you mentioned, I never really thought of it as contributing to what I really wanted to do at the time. And I wouldn't say it's like all STEM. It's mostly like these kind of computer science, like product focused people that tend to really be disconnected from those types of courses and want to kind of strike out on their own. And for me, that was the case. I mean, I'm still in university, right? But the same case for the classes university. I just don't see any relevant value for myself. Like at the time, like it just doesn't seem like it's really doing anything for me or adding any value. Specifically for like what I'm doing at the time, that is. So, yeah. I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess one more thing to add is besides the calculus and those standard STEM classes that are used as mainstream like benchmarkers to see how well you performed in acceptance in these programs, how about like the one that like the elephant in the room, the computer science classes, for example, like in high school, like computer science or computer engineering that you both took? 'Cause considering that you're in computer engineering, and I took like some level of high school computer science or computer engineering where we focus on like C++.
Yeah.
And building like using breadboards, like some weird mixture of Arduino, like pre-Arduino.
Yeah.
Did you see like relevance there, or do you think that obviously it's a given that most people will accept the fact that the standard public education system when it comes to computer science obviously years behind just because of the natural cycle works, right? It's often that the private sector leads, then the education system has to come back to the private sector, ask them what skills are the highest quality, build a curriculum out of that. By that time the wheel's already spinning. So but did you see like a great disconnect between like the standard computer science practices at these high schools and at secondary level versus not even like at Shopify, but some like even at like your post-secondary level?
I don't think at our school, and I'm pretty sure at our school, we had no courses related to kind of really user focused software practices like web development or iOS development. I think there was web development, but for sure mobile was not included. So in my case, none of that carried over for sure. And for the computer science classes I did take, and I did take them, I think almost every year, the languages were very, like they were useful in applying for jobs is what I noticed. Like I did have interviews where, for example, the languages, like I'm getting technical here, but the languages Java, C++, those were used in interviews. Like that did help. But in terms of the actual work that I've done thus far, I haven't actually used them in any significant way, really. But that might change, in future positions that I might take, because I know that those two languages are really important. But still very early on in my career, I didn't really use them yet.
Yeah, so continuing on to that, do you think if there were more courses relevant to like web development and app development, like using, I think it was React Nature in the program, if there were courses relating to that, would you have been more interested in those courses, or do you think you still would have been distracted from school?
I think I would have been. I think I would have been distracted by school, but those classes would be the ones that I would, look forward to going to the most. Yeah. And I think that a lot more people would be more interested in STEM in general if those courses did exist. I think it's kind of like, I don't know why they don't yet. Is what I'm saying.
I guess, yeah, it's because it's the future, and I guess schools just take a while to develop like curriculums and things like that.
Yeah.
That's guess, yeah, for sure.
And I heard, I think during kind of the last few months, there was a whole restructure of the education system. I don't remember the specifics, but like Mayor Ford was like, let's introduce coding from the second grade or something. You guys remember that?
Oh, no, I haven't heard that, no.
Yeah, so they said like they'd be changing it completely, and hopefully those types of courses are included in there too.
For sure. Even basic like algorithmic thinking from like a very young age is pretty good to kind of
Yeah, like it won't be like coding
of
languages
course.
like at that young age, but it's more like systematic thinking and kind
Yeah.
of thinking in
Yeah.
that way.
It's often strange because majority of the things that we do like in everyday life are can kind of act as like algorithms, even though that
Yeah,
word is probably overused in every single part of society as trying to sound very complicated and complex.
yeah,
But I mean, it's just a series of things that work towards a common goal. It's like often like
yeah,
all these flowcharts in businesses or corporate structures or the way we do certain operations in companies or in organizations or in whatever religious organizations, they can all be used as algorithms, right? And the
yeah.
efficiency part of it is just to get it done quickly. Yeah. Speaking of which, the next thing that I want to ask you in terms of your perspective on the job market since high school. So you mentioned that you've been like coding from like a freelance perspective or like a self-educational perspective since middle school. So that's what around like the years 2014, 2015, when essentially it was kind of when around like the same time era as like this whole movement began to occur. It's this kind of, I believe the whole democratization process was becoming even more exponential to the point where people were able to get these developer tools at their fingertips much more quicker than they were prior. And then over the course of the last 5 years, we've often seen like stuff explode into everything else. It's no longer just developer tools or to become a web developer. Ultimately, like you're seeing the rise of these open source educational platforms like Udemy or Udacity or all these other places that people go to either get an education at this point because it's become so democratized and become so official and recognized. Do you see where does the job market for have you seen a huge job market since you left high school at a change in the job market since you left high school and now, particularly because of everything we've seen in 2020? Like, have you seen any seismic change?
In 2020
Yeah,
or in the past few
in
years.
the past year, in the past few years, since you started, since you've kind of dipped your toes in this and you've kind of
Yeah.
understood how the standard procedure works till today because of all the changes we've gone through.
So the job. Okay. So I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, but for example, I've seen many companies drop traditional requirements in favor, not in favor of, but uh, like for example, I was browsing through the Apple Jobs website the other day, right? And then they said pursuing a bachelor or have a bachelor in computer science or equivalent knowledge. Like there's a lot of that happening now because of this uh, kind of like all these resources being available all over the place. People are more trustworthy and people learning on their own. And even that, I myself like don't really. Whenever I want to learn something, I know where to go now, and it's not really a big issue. Like I don't really depend on my degree anymore, and a lot of companies are doing the same. Even Shopify, the interns don't actually require any to be pursuing any education. They used to, but now they just say that if you're interested and you want to learn about the business, then come join. Like they're very open ended, and I think we're seeing a lot more of that happening too, especially with recently now every class is going online, and a lot of people are paying the same amount of money and they're questioning the value. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of questioning the value of your the conventional education, when do you think was the epiphany moment? Like when was the epiphany moment to where you thought that it would be more efficient for you to take the path of self-education? Like what was the motivation behind it? And in that time of deciding before that moment, that sort of period of time when you're kind of juggling the thoughts and the processes of like, hey, is this worth it? Is this not worth it? What would you change about that? Like, what would you change? Would you tell yourself that your old self that, you know what, just don't overthink it, just go for this path because I know it's more lucrative, it's more rewarding, or like what part of the journey would you change?
I don't really know if I'd change anything, but in terms of the turning point for me, it was actually very early on, but I did have conflicts just because of how like hardwired people are to kind of follow the traditional path, right? So even I had those kind of self doubts, but for the most part, it was when I saw all these startups blowing up, and they were run by like 17-year-old kids, and they were getting like VC funding, and they're all like software developers.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I didn't do any of that. But what was really pivotal for me was when I first got a freelance job. They didn't even know like how old I am, and they didn't even care. But the fact that I was able to do something for them and was rewarded for that purely off just like learning on my own on the side, that was definitely something that kicked the gears for me.
Yeah, going on to the topic of self-education, how did you start? Like, how did you find it? How did you realize that, this is the pathway I want to go on?
Right. I think I got a course from my friend, a Udemy course. Like, he just gave me his account, and it was a web development course, like a full web development course. You can style, make your website, whatever, database, etc. And that was the first course I ever took in the field. And it was, I thought the quality of education, like, they're just more passionate than the average teacher in teaching. So I did kind of go on a binge fest for those types of courses on Udemy for different types of things that I was interested in. And again, when I got like actual freelance jobs for that, it just kind of just helped the cycle keep going, really. Like, yeah.
And like following up for those people who are looking to, get into self-education, how easy would you say it was to get started?
I think there's so many resources now that I think it's a lot easier than it was for me. And even it was even easy for me, but now it's even easier is what I'm saying. Like, it gets exponentially bigger every time. So, and there's such a big community of people who are learning in public as well. And that's a big thing now. Like, if you go on Twitter, people just learn in public. There's this thing called 100 Days of Code where people share like new things that they make every day, and they do it for 100 days. And then they get feedback. And so there's a lot of kind of a community and a lot of, again, resources. And it's also getting a lot easier to build things now too.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, in terms of that pathway down, when it comes to self-learning and advice about it, where do you see the current stance of the developer, like the position of the developer in the market? Like what seems to be it used to be like in our time in high school that if you were, especially if you're developing, either to be a mobile developer or like a web developer, and then machine learning and AI started to take off. But in terms of like the developing part, where do you see now it exploding and blowing up? Like what's the next big thing? Because it used to be React Native and people who are able to kind of be familiar with that platform, and not even the back end at this point. It was just like people who are able to make like complex designs and make sure that the user felt comfortable with the product. Where do you see the next step going? Like, where is the next hot thing that you recommend to people?
So my area of domain is not even that big for this question, but like, for example, mobile, you mentioned React Native. That is still something that is shifting today. Like, during my internship, Shopify said that they will be deprecating all their iOS apps and their Android apps, and they're switching fully to React Native. And a lot of the iOS developers on my team were like freaking out because they don't want to do this, right? Like, they've lived iOS for 10 years. And the message that Shopify had was just like thrive on change. And luckily for me, like, I had left before I still like iOS a lot. And so they didn't start when I left, but now they are continuing to do that. And again, for mobile, like, there's something called Swift UI, which came out recently. It makes it so much easier to like start in in app development. I recommend it to like a lot of the people that I know who want to get started. In terms of, I mean, the same general things that you mentioned are still growing every day. Like, for example, AI. There was a new bot that came out recently. Have you heard of it? GPT-3.
Yes,
I think it's called. Yeah, like the tools that developers are able to make with that has been incredibly valuable. And like, for example, there's someone who built a natural language kind of bot where you can talk to it, and then it'll design an app for you. So you say, I want an app that has this and that, and then it'll design it for you, just using that library. So the same things that you mentioned are still growing every day. AR is getting better, especially with the new iPhones and the LiDAR scanners. So at that point, like, just follow what, I guess, interests you in those subfields, really.
So are you recommending that in terms of what's hot now to actually be a part of has to be incumbent on you? Like, the onus has to be on you to be following like leaders within the industry, like people, like even particularly companies, and not just companies, but individuals who are like prime leaders within like the field of AI or of development. And like for most people, the industry standard would definitely have to be Apple, which we'll get onto your experience there as well. But do you say that people have to be doing their part in research with the latest tools? And if so, is that where I think the kind of differentiator comes in? Like, you have certain people who, because it's cool to do, like, will get on this like passed down, right? This idea of like self-education, and particularly in the developer field. Do you think that that's what differentiates the people who actually see it through versus the ones that actually quit in between? Because I've often seen many people who say that they want to do something, and then particularly within computer science, or not just computer science, but rather now in web development, iOS mobile development, because the tools are so easy to access. It's just like a few clicks and a download. Do you see it because the learning curve now is a bit more, as you've said, the learning curve is getting much more like curve now, so it's much easier for people to.
It's easier to learn, but there's also so much more, so it's harder to kind of filter out what matters.
So I think it's like the overwhelming like sense of information overload, right? This idea that there's like so much stuff to do at once and you don't know what the hell to like target first, kind of. It's like jumping on like the bandwagon train, like which one do I jump on first, right? So
so it wasn't even that long ago where I kept kind of trying to keep track too much meticulously of like where the market is going. But I think actually what matters more is like sure, you can keep track of things, play around with things, but you should really practice like focus and you know, you shouldn't just jump wherever the market goes. I think it kind of pulls on both ends. Like, don't just chase the new thing, but also be aware of what's going on. That way you can pick better, but also like just don't chase everything. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like I'm contradicting myself, but it is kind of what I follow. Like just be like that bot that I mentioned, the AI bot. Like, I remember that coming out, it was super interesting. I kind of like looked into it into a bit, and even though it was kind of trending, I didn't really drop everything that I was working on at the time and learning on the side just to do that. Because if you just like stop and start and finish like 10 things, you won't really get deep in anything. So I do think specialization matters, and then you can kind of become that T-shaped person later on.
Yeah, and going a bit more into self-education, our last guest was talking about, like taking risks to get rewarded. Where do you see your stance on that? Like, do you believe in that statement?
I think the biggest, I think so. Yeah, I definitely think risk is important. And I think it's also good to minimize risk at the same time. But like, for example, the biggest risk I think I took was just not really going all in school. Like, that's probably what I think happened. But yeah, like in general, like the advice is take risks if you can. And I think they do. The worst thing that can happen is not really that bad, to be honest.
It's often like an age game too, right? Because we've often like been told that like the older you get, the less priority chances you have of taking risk, right?
Yeah, I read something recently from a founder who's really young as well, and he said that like most people now who are listening, like the Gen Z people, are living in their parents' house for the most part, unless they're in dorms or whatever. They don't pay rent. They don't have children. They don't any of that shit. And now is like the time to save. And if you want to do something wild, then just do it. And yeah, like I said, the worst thing that can happen is not really that bad.
Yeah, it's like often like a best case scenario example, right? The fact that you have the ability to like talk like that in terms of like, oh, you know what, I'm not paying rent, or if I'm working, I'm paying income tax, or like there's a chance that you're not even paying property tax either because you're renting a dorm, and you know what, you're not even part of what I would arguably say that are the most like the biggest part of the labor force. Like obviously if you're working a job, you're part of the general labor force of your country or whatever, but in terms of you actually having to be committed to a job, like we're seeing this often now where it's like you have the best case scenario to do whatever it is that you're doing, and the worst case in or sort of this context of time would be not taking anything risk and just doing it the same way people have always done it. Now that someone would argue that if this is a path that people continue to go down on, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the same results as the past, because stuff is changing much more quicker. But that's essentially what I'd like to hammer home, is that in the grand scheme of like all of time, context wise, it's never been like this better. Like it's never been this easy to to get into anything or to take a risk in particular because of the amount of resources that are available. Like basically every single factor is considered. Like you don't have major responsibility. And it used to be when you were young, you never had any major responsibility, but the bar to entry was much higher, right?
Yeah.
Now it's you don't have you barely have responsibility, and the bar to entry is much lower. So then there's really nothing else kind of stopping you in that sense. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I agree. And like a lot of people would say to that, like, while you're rushing, it's never too late to start. Like they say, like later on I can do this.
Yeah.
But I think people equate that for like delaying too much. Like I think the better thing is like just start now instead of waiting. It's always going to be better to start now, really.
Yeah, and as the both of you have mentioned, like barriers are getting reduced. Do you think people, especially in Gen Z, are more so taking it for granted? That's why they're like delaying it as much as possible.
Wait, they're more what?
They're taking it more for granted. Like since the barriers are reduced, they're saying, "Oh, like it's so much easier, so I can just start on it later." Like, do you think that's the reason why they're like delaying it so much?
It could be. I mean, I don't know if that's like the main reason. It could be just fear as well, or whatever the risk is. It could be some level of fear, or just not wanting to deviate from the traditional kind of path. But yeah,
makes sense. Going down on that kind of rabbit hole. Especially this year, we saw like an overwhelming sense of like fragility when it came to like basically everything that was standard or establishment or conventional. Like we saw like things being essentially, we saw like whether it be government, whether it be companies, whether it be just like life in general, we saw everything just go like flash by in front of our eyes, right? Like in the most sort of a signature of a government official, like at the top of an Ottawa and Washington or wherever our listeners are from. We saw the entire government and society just shut down, in showing how fragile like this conventionality was, and how much we've taken it for granted. Do you think that going forward it's going to become standard practice to do something like this? And what I mean by something like this is like there's going to be hyper focus on individuals stressing the importance of the individual to start to carve out their own future paths, like in a very detailed way. Like we're talking like talking about starting multiple streams of income at a very early age, possibly in high school, or the importance of understanding the tax system. Because another thing that we also saw is, despite going along with the collapse of conventional wisdom during the past year or so, we also saw a lot of, I continually see a lot of ignorance from our generation, in the sense that there are some things that happen in the world which we just have accepted happen, but we don't know why they happen, or we don't know maybe that it's not the effective system. Like me and Nikhil are always constantly talking about the fact that like during this crisis, you could have been one of two people, which was either you could have started some other project, or you could have just been at home. If you were in school, like when school was done in the summertime, you probably either took like another semester, or you were on CERB or some federal government assistance program. And like for us, we were just talking about this. We're like, it would be very easy to like just be on like a federal assistance program, or it'd be very easy to like do some of these things with regards to the government assistance. But in reality, like this is going to come and bite everyone in the back, right? Like it's like that government doesn't have an infinite like money supply, because they're just printing based off future risk. That we're kicking the can down the road in essence, right? Like we're kicking it down the road so that another generation in a future, or in 2 generations, is going to have to bear the brunt of our mistakes currently at the moment. So do you see that that's going to become standard practice, if not enforced by government, a small vocal minority within like each of our communities are going to start kind of speak up, saying that like, look at how fragile everything was. Like whether it came to government assistance, like government wasn't there at the right place at the right time. These CERB checks aren't going to be there forever. Like who knows where the money's going? Are we going to let some government bureaucrats sign away our taxpayer dollars? Like, do you see this stuff happening now more and more, where more stuff is going to become democratized to the point where people are now going to have to consider at a very early age, okay, I need to make income streams. I need to consider self-education, all these things that we're talking about.
I don't know what the involvement of the government would be like. That's very unpredictable on my end, because I don't look into that stuff. But like, I think that a lot of people are becoming more self-aware that they just can't. There's a lot they just can't control. Like even if it wasn't the pandemic, like it could have been something else. And I have seen a lot of people kind of turn this around, and like people who lost their jobs, like started side businesses, designing or whatever. And those people will become smarter because of it. Like they'll, whenever everything goes back to normal, they'll still kind of they'll know better this time to kind of not put everything in all eggs in one basket. Essentially, will it become standard practice? Yeah, I'm not sure. I hope so. I mean, it definitely sounds like a good idea, but I don't know how that would even be communicated like to the younger generations. Really, will it be taught in schools? I don't know. I really doubt it, but yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Now I wanted to slowly shift into the main part of our podcast, talking about your experience and your journey to San Francisco and Apple's HQ. Could you enlighten us more on that?
Yeah, so I don't remember how exactly I learned about it, but there was this program that Apple used to hold, or they still do, but not this year, called the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference. And part of that, they had a scholarship program for students. So what Worldwide Developer Conference is it's a conference that Apple hosts every year in California, where they talk about their latest software updates and sometimes hardware updates as well. So last year they did, iOS 13, and then the new Mac Pro, and a lot of press comes, a lot of developers come, and this is the only event that they host that are like purely for developers, not just press. And then as part of that, they have a scholarship program where they invite students to apply, and 350, I think, worldwide get accepted, and you have to be a student, and then they fly you out to California to visit this week-long conference for free, and everything's covered. And you get to meet all these Apple developers, and even Tim Cook, like you get to meet him, and they took us for a tour of like the spaceship, the Apple campus, and that was fun. So yeah, I mean, that's what the whole thing's about.
And was it like a standard application process? Like you're saying that there was kind of like their only conference dedicated to acknowledging developers. Like,
yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily call them like amateur developers, but like let's say like people like everyday kids or young people or just developers that are like from around the world that they fly in. So what was that like journey like? Was it like
yeah.
So
5,000 people come in general, okay. And those developers. Those are people who are also developers. They don't have to qualify for anything. They just literally enter a lottery system. If they win, they get an email. Then they have to pay for the ticket, and then they go. So yeah. So it's a lottery ticket for the right to pay them, essentially. And for the students, it's a pretty interesting application. It's like, I think you answered two questions, like what have you done to the Swift community? So Swift is the language that Apple uses for their programs. And the other one is like, why do you want to come here? And then part of that, you also have to build a Swift playground, which is like an interactive like kind of app, but you can run in your laptop or your iPad. And you have to use that Swift playgrounds to build something that can be experienced in 3 minutes, and it can be anything. It's very open-ended, and it can be like a game, an educational kind of app, anything really. And then you submit that as part of the application as well. And then you just wait 3 weeks or something, and then you wait for them to tell you what's up.
Just what was the experience like, waiting for that response?
Yeah, no, I got in for 2018 and 2019. Like 2018 was I remember both of them very vividly because I was really excited for them, right? So waiting wasn't really a big deal, but the day of I was nervous the entire day. Like my heart was like racing. And the second time, same deal. I even slept so that I could like forget about it. And then I remember opening up the email and I got in, so that was pretty exciting. But yeah, like they were both really exciting events, and I think that I wouldn't have even gotten Shopify if I didn't go there.
What was the biggest highlight of that trip? Like as you mentioned, you met Tim Cook, and so for us, it's sort of like a dream come true to meet like an industry leader. In terms of personalities, in terms of like the best experience there, I'll ask you about that first, and I'll have a follow-up question. But what was your best experience or the highlight of the trip? Was there a particular moment?
So the first time they gave us a tour of the Apple campus, that was really cool because they even took us to the restaurant that they have. It's called Cafe Max, and they gave us like free food and stuff. That was cool. And they even took us to the Steve Jobs Theater, which is where they host all their events. And then the second time I went was honestly meeting the people. Like the people I met the second time around were really dope, and I used to talk to them like every day. So that was probably the highlight.
So it was the building of the network that was kind of essentially the relationship that you have kept and built on.
Yeah, for the second time at least. The first time I didn't really talk. So
yeah.
Yeah,
makes sense. My follow-up question was, when going to like an industry leader, like I'm assuming that whenever we look at the quality, I mean, look at the process of the company execution of these events, these virtual events now, because of all these conferences and these every year we all look forward to the September event at Apple. What was the culture like? We all see this on TV, and we hear about Silicon Valley culture. We've heard about startup culture. People find the rides and swings and slides and free food amusing. Like this weird coffee machine that's in the corner, and now people are spending most of their time just like playing foosball than working. What was the culture like when you were there? Like, was this atmosphere of like being like calm, at peace, and feeling productive, or was it kind of like a bit like different?
Oh, okay. It was very chill. Like,
interesting.
Okay, the reason I reacted like that was because I missed it. But basically, like, it was really. I mean, I didn't stay there for too long, right? And like what you said, the foosball, the all these slides and shit. Apple doesn't really do that. They're very kind of hardcore with it, and it isn't really like the rest of the companies. But in general, like it does have that kind of aura of like Silicon Valley, like or California in general. Like just everyone's just super chill. Everything closes at like 6 o'clock. Like it was very different. I did really miss it a lot. Like when I came back to Toronto, it was really chaotic in comparison. And yeah, it was just really nice. I miss it.
You must have felt like you were in a movie, just in Los Angeles in the Hollywood area. Like,
oh yeah, I wish I went to Los Angeles. Like the thing is, I was supposed to extend my trip a week, but I had a math exam within the facilities, so so I couldn't extend it, unfortunately. But like, if I did, I would have kind of. I wish I visited more campuses too. Like, they hosted a lot of tours. I didn't go to many of them. I went to the Google one. But there were ones for like Twitter, Slack, and there were many like tours going on at the same time. Because in WWDC, like 5,000 people come around. So the reason they host these tours is like they want to poach some of these people, right? So that was really fun.
Pretty good. You just mentioned like you felt this weird chaos feeling when you returned back to Toronto. We obviously know that there's an immense startup pool of talent here in Toronto, like not just talented people, but the funding, the companies, the startups in particular. And I can speak from my perspective in terms of someone in biological sciences. We see more startups popping up with correlation at the University Health Network, or UHN, partnering up with people at U of T, at the Vector Institute, which is a leader in AI research and machine learning. Shout out to Jeffrey Hinton. But where do you see the difference between startup culture in Toronto versus in other places? And by other places, I mean like the most obvious one, which is like Silicon Valley and San Francisco. Where do you see the difference there?
So you might be more well versed in this, so I'd like to know what your opinion is, or just from like hearing. But in my opinion, like just based on the experience that I worked at Mental AI for a bit, the startup, I spent a lot of time at Mars. And just from the universities like Velocity at Waterloo and DMC at Ryerson. And like what it seems to me like the only really big difference is that people take Silicon Valley startups a lot more seriously. At least before, like now everything's kind of going digital, nothing matters. But what I at least saw, and this might be very wrong, but what I saw is like Silicon Valley is where you go. It's kind of like Wall Street if you're a financier, right? And now that's definitely changing. Not even the fact that everything is going digital, but a lot of people are moving to Miami. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Texas, Austin is becoming like another rival.
And Miami, like the mayor is like tweeting a lot. Have you been following up on that?
Yeah. That's actually one of the things my next question was going to be about. If you're okay, comfortable leading into that. Since your departure from Silicon Valley, let's say, one to say that.
Definitely.
And seeing these movements and shifts. I know you just mentioned that you feel Toronto startups and those startups in particular are not taken too seriously. In terms of Silicon Valley itself existing as a sort of like a name brand, as a beacon of progress in terms of technology, innovation, and open source ideas, do you see that slowly shifting to any particular geography? I know you mentioned Miami, and you're mentioning the fact that the digital movement of working from home is essentially making the idea of being like a developer, a web developer, an iOS developer, an engineer in any of these categories even more democratized to the point where you can do it from your bedroom. Do you see these two trends like happening at once? Because my whole perspective is that when people have said this is the future of work, this is the new normal, as people are calling it, right? My whole thing is that people will always want to be near people that they think similarly to or whatever. I don't think that the idea of going to a physical location or like a location where there's this atmosphere, this ambiance of just competitiveness, hard work, and just friendly competition is going anywhere. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think if anything, it's going to be that more people, if people will have the option of working in a digital environment if they choose to. But do you think that this sense of going to a particular location now, like the California dream of going to like Silicon Valley, do you think that's slowly evaporating to the point where it's like, okay, I might just go to like my city's core downtown, like in downtown Toronto, like I want to go to like Mars now because this is like the new thing?
Yeah. So good question. So since 9 months ago, everything went digital, right? Like the tools have been growing every day, like new tools for collaboration online, right? And that's making it a lot easier for people to not only continue working online, but like start startups online, right? And what I think is going to happen now is that the competition is going to be a lot more in general. Like I feel like it's a very obvious point that like now you're competing with everyone in the world, and even the companies that are now working digitally, like Shopify is doing digital by default now. Their internship postings used to be, you have to be in Toronto for the Toronto office. Now it's like you have to be in, this side of the hemisphere, like this hemisphere rather, and like it's very like the competition has increased a lot more now, and that's good, right, for like overall innovation and all that. But I like what you said is like being around close people and stuff. I hope it's not going anywhere. Like I prefer that a lot more to just everything being digital. As for California, I mean, I don't know if it's gonna like die. Like I know that rent prices are going down like a lot because everyone's leaving. A lot of people are leaving like Miami, Texas. I think even Tesla is moving now to Texas.
Elon.
Yeah. But I just like the weather in California, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like it just seems like a very wholesome place to start a company at. And in my opinion, like I take physical spaces over like from home anytime. And I hope that continues. It will, I think. And like I hope the conferences that went digital don't stay digital as well.
Yeah.
WWDC is digital now. I hope that doesn't,
makes sense.
That's boring. Yeah.
It's like 1,000 screens on Zoom. Like looking at
like following up on that, I know you have an internship at Shopify and you work with Middle UI, if I believe that's the name.
Middle, yeah.
Yeah. What would you say was better in your opinion, joining a startup or working for a founded business?
I think startups are okay. So Shopify definitely, had better monetary benefits, like and just benefits in general. Like for example, if you buy a book they'll cover it because it's considered self-growth. Or if you buy a course, like it has a lot of dope things like that. And another thing is like a lot of the tasks are kind of loosely defined. Like not everything's defined for you, but you know where to go. and if you have a question, people will answer it. The thing that's exciting with startups is that you'll have jobs that you're not qualified for. So like they'll tell you to build the whole back end or like something outrageous. And that will force you to learn a lot more, I think. So in Shopify, I learned a lot of the best practices, which is great. But in Metal.ai, I learned a lot quicker and a lot more in a short period of time. And I think it is a lot more exciting too, because it's less people. It was like 5 people, I think. So you just get a lot closer with people, and there is also risk involved in that, of course. But depending on how you kind of get hired, there's also a lot of reward, depending on like if you're an early employee or something. Personally, my personal goal is like to get experience from big companies for best practices.
But implement, right?
But yeah, and then after that, I want to really kind of take interesting startups and start there, or even start my own. But I do think best practices and all that is still very important.
So would you say that like going into a startup is more of a stepping stone into going into your own business, your own startup?
Wait, as in like harder, like
as in like learning from the startup, as you said, like in middle AI, you had jobs you're not qualified for, so you're forced to learn more. So do you think that helped you when you went into like your Shopify internship, and that'll help you for your future, like if you make a startup?
Right. Yeah, I think it did help a lot for Shopify, because what Shopify does in the middle of your internship is they do like a review of you, right? Like your lead talks to you about what you've done really well. And something that he told me was that I was scrappy, and like I was able to get things done quickly. And I think I learned that directly from the startup. So it was definitely a good part of it, like being scrappy, knowing when to be scrappy, essentially.
And you're zooming in more into Shopify in particular. So your current task and your current position is an iOS developer. So you could just let the audience know what that entails. Like obviously the given is the iOS platform, but what other roles and responsibilities have you had or have been given to you to undertake?
So specifically, I'm working on the point of sale app.
Okay.
And that, for people who don't know, is like the app that Shopify offers that basically allows people who have brick and mortar stores to make their iPad into like a cash register. So they can like manage purchases and like pick from their catalog, and manage. And if they have like those chip readers, they can also manage payments on the iPad. And that's the app that I'm working on. And in terms of the specific, like I guess, responsibilities, I did have to work with another intern the entire time. He was a backend developer, and the feature that we were building required both. So every day we'd have to like have a sync to talk about what needs to be done on both ends, because communication was key in that case, like to make it work properly, right? And just another thing that I didn't really expect was that I had to review a lot of code. Just like it wasn't even related to my work. It was just like other iOS developers in the company who needed their code reviewed before they upload it. It would kind of ping me, and then I had to learn how to like look at code semantics and know what's right and wrong and point that out. So that was a part of my job as well.
And would you argue that was probably like that like last point of like reviewing other people's code and peer reviewing? You think that was kind of like the place of most growth when it came to Shopify, like right now that you're currently going through, because it's much more harder to, or maybe you're learning from your perspective that it's kind of weird looking at other people's code and like looking at their kind of errors, but at the same time, it's hard to relate at the moment. Do you think?
So one thing they said in the review, again, the impact review that they did with me, was that I should learn more to think in first principles. And that goes back to reviewing code. Like you have to ask questions like, why is this here? Or does this have any value to be here? Or can we do something better? So it definitely helped with those types of, questions. But I think my area of most growth was just like was actually very technical, like the actual Swift like language. Like I got a lot better at it. And yeah, that definitely, in my opinion, that was the area of most growth, because I can also, when working on side projects, I actually saw myself applying those lessons directly, which is really good to see.
So, like even for me, I just started learning like Python, like the bare basics. and I always had
Yeah.
that stigma before coding that it's really hard and you have to look through every line and like if one character is wrong, it messes the whole thing up. But using things like programs like Wing, which is like a Python tutor,
Yeah.
I realized that a lot of programs are now built to show you errors that are made and things like that. So what would you say to someone who's looking to start learning code? Like, how easy was it for you to learn, and how easy is it to apply it to like real world situations?
So the first code I did was like web development, right? And that was bad because it didn't show you the errors. Like it wasn't very, like if you ever made a website in HTML, CSS, it's not very descriptive on what's wrong. Like you won't know what's wrong. But like with other things like mobile development or, really any language really, it will be a lot more helpful. So what was the second question? Like, how would people go about learning, I guess?
Yeah, like so someone who has the same stigma as me about like needing to review every single line and errors. What would you say to that person? Like, how easy is it to code, and how easy is it to apply code in real world applications?
Yeah, so I mean, on a very specific example, like if you use, there are many tools, like you said, that kind of check these things for you. Like there are IDEs and links. So, for example, Visual Studio Code, you can literally download the depending on what language you are. So in this case, Python, but I'm pretty sure Python's there by default. But anyways, a Python lint, for example, like there's a lot of these tools that would basically help you go from 0 to 1 essentially. And another thing that I actually didn't know how to do until I worked at Shopify, or didn't know how to do properly, was read documentation. And that is actually a skill. Like documentation, when I first saw it, because I was watching videos for learning in the beginning. Like I was watching people doing things and I'd kind of mimic them. And then when I looked at documentation, it was like a whole another world because it was like very formal, and the examples they gave were not really helpful. But working at Shopify kind of forced me to know how to learn and know how to read from documentation. And I wouldn't take that for granted. Like I would suggest looking at those things. And I guess that would be advice.
And speaking of, because as forget it just being as an iOS developer at Shopify, but essentially this idea that most of these startup companies, essentially the employees have this sort of this sense of being proud of where they work at in terms of their workplace, right? This idea that like the initial, as you mentioned, the idea like if you are the industry standard for anyone who's a developer would have been prior to 2020 going to Silicon Valley. Like that was where the experts were. That's what you want to go. You obviously juxtapose that with any like Wall Street trader, like to go to Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
I think like if we like analyze historically speaking, we saw like how around the 1980s as Silicon Valley was developing, sort of this idea that's like essentially what people used to call initially this hippie campus, right? This idea of like people just go about their chill, be at peace or whatever. But and it used to be before the whole cubicle model in like places in Lower Manhattan or in these big cities like Toronto. This idea of being sort of like a company ambassador, essentially, like now employees are more than just employees. It's almost feeling like you're like a kind of like a talking head for a company. And based off that, I wanted to ask you in terms of what Shopify is specifically known for, which is like their section of e-commerce and empowering other entrepreneurs into growing. Do you think Shopify, in terms of e-commerce and how important it has become from where Shopify started? Because essentially it's this idea where you have one company, you have one sector, and then builds like the primary sector building out the secondary and then the tertiary. So you could argue that Shopify went from just being a developer app, web app application to now being literally the leader in a tertiary industry, whereby local entrepreneurs who are designers, who are t-shirt designers, who are small business owners can do that by moving around all the other industry hurdles or conventional wisdom. Like you have to buy a brick and mortar. Now you no longer have to buy a brick and mortar. Like, how much do you think e-commerce has changed the game? Because we're now seeing slowly brick and mortar die, right? We're seeing these areas people are going out of for like bankruptcy fully, and how big box retailers might still be winning, like in some point, they're still willing to buy those brands, but we're seeing how quickly Shopify's helped these third party and these like really local people and like completely democratize the process whereby people who just were starting out of their room are now 20K, 30K followers on Instagram and having like modeling sessions and having people model their clothes for them and everything. How much do you think e-commerce changed the game, and where do you see it going to the future?
Yeah, I mean, no, I definitely think it was a huge, shift. Like, before I even was interested in working Shopify, I didn't really know much about the e-commerce space. Like, I knew if I wanted to make a site, I would go to Shopify, but I didn't really know much about what they were about and all that. So, they did go from this web app that just made you, allowed you to make an online store to actual multi-channel system where you can kind of host products everywhere. Like, again, like with POS, for example, or Facebook ads or TikTok even. Like, they're trying to make it a one place for everything, essentially. And you can even have like Shopify products that are hosted on Amazon. And I don't know if you guys use the Shop app, but like it's, so to answer your question is like, the whole point of Shopify, the whole mission was to kind of allow businesses anywhere in the world, right? Like to empower them with the tools to make, whatever they want, to become entrepreneurs. And they even like inspire that throughout the company as well. Like they say, if you want to make an online store, we can help you with that. Like they do really care about the merchant. Like they're very merchant focused. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the whole goal. Like the whole goal is to basically make it easier, and they do it without getting in the way of the merchant as well. Like the whole goal is to make it easier for the merchant and not to kind of take away from them, not overcharge them or take profits. So in general, though, e-commerce has definitely changed the game. I mean, it's no question that even before Shopify was a thing, there was WooCommerce by WordPress, which is still around right now. But the ability for anyone to kind of design something or knit something together and then sell it is really amazing, I think.
There's more empowering the individual at the end of the day, right? Which is like okay.
And like and anyone will also be able to contribute to that. Like Shopify has an app store too, where developers can add separate tools to or add additional tools for these merchants. So for example, there's a tool that can automatically handle the shipping and handling for you, or even automatically like print the art on a t-shirt or etc. So those tools definitely make it easier for anyone to get started and start selling online.
I wanted to move toward and segue towards LinkedIn in terms of a networking app, because we wanted to ask you about this too, considering that your centrality, your I guess I could argue one of the keys to your success has been your ability to market yourself as a developer. And often we're seeing this shift in the industry now where it's because it's more individual oriented, individually empowering. There's also this self-responsibility that comes into play where it's like, okay, now because it's been democratized for you, because you have more and more freedom to do essentially whatever you want, it's also incumbent upon you to embrace the responsibility of being able to market yourself as a brand now. How important do you see personal brand? Like, do you think that this era of moving from just being a developer, or just being like a student in a university, how important do you think the branding is now? Like it used to be a thing for models or reserved for particular industries, but do you think now we're seeing this huge intersection between everything that can possibly exist at once because we're living in such a singularity of a time? How important do you think personal branding is, whether it be on LinkedIn or on IG, but priority on LinkedIn, because the ability for you like to article write or for you to discuss in a post or write a Medium article about your experience, how important do you think that has become? Do you think it's becoming more and more central, more and more imperative upon people to do that if they're wanting to get into the space?
I think we're going to see more people making like websites. Like LinkedIn is like a given, right? Like even my careers class in like the 9th grade told me to start a LinkedIn class, and they even walked us through it. So like that's a given, but a lot of people are kind of moving away from actually using it, especially people our age. I feel, you'll see the occasional post of people updating their job status or announcing where they got their latest internship or those types of things. But I think to really kind of stand out, you do need to have control over your brand, in my opinion, and that does. Start with LinkedIn and then you kind of attach your website and stuff. And I do think it's really important, like depending on what you're trying to do, of course. But I do think having a way to kind of brand yourself and show yourself off, including any work that you do on the side and any ventures that you've had, and even a newsletter if you're into that sort of stuff is really opens a lot of doors for you. And another thing is like sharing your work publicly will bring about a lot more opportunities than just like the kind of traditional like applying resumes and stuff. Like I do think kind of creating a narrative around your learning and your growth and everything you build is really important.
Do you think there's like a relatability factor to that? Because it's like this idea that we all like love storytelling, like in an odd way, like regardless of what field they're in, even if you're in the hardest of sciences. I think Richard Feynman, if I'm not mistaken, a famous physicist of the 20th century, who said that the idea is to make everything, his technique or his Feynman technique to learn anything is to make it super easy to be able to teach it to others, right?
Yeah.
Of how you learn it yourself. Do you think we're embracing more of that now to the point where I think everyone has to become a storyteller because it's kind of like innate within us as human beings? Like, do you think that we have to embrace more of that to become better marketers of ourselves? Like the idea of storytelling is that people will find it very interesting to read about an individual or to hear this individual speak their points and what they're working on, and kind of mastering that ability to sell yourself as an individual, which goes back to the personal brand thing, which is like, at this point, I think everyone is a personal brand, like whether you like it or not. I think
Yeah.
you like it would be odd to someone at least 100 years ago that you would have this immediate access to even the lowest of the low, like 100 people, like 100 followers that would on average see your story, like that quick on Instagram. Like if you're checking how many people have seen your story, like on Instagram, 100 or 200 people have seen your story already. It's like in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty overwhelming. And this idea that often I equate it to being like mini politicians, because like if you think about like the average constituency or like the average like area, if you represent something, could be like 500 or 1,000 people, right? And if you have like if you look at the top-notch IG influencers, you can think of like millions of followers. That's as big as like an entire city. So it's kind of like you have this kind of following echo chamber. Do you think that going down that train of thought, do you think that it has to come from an area of storytelling, like of relatability, that you might be an expert in one thing, you have to learn how to communicate that to others, the general population, because they're not going to be experts in what you are, but they will want to know from a storytelling perspective, you know?
Yeah, I mean, again, it does depend on what you're trying to do. If you're working on like a very specialized field, I don't think it matters as much. Like if you have like a very traditional path to get into a very, again, specialized field, it doesn't really matter. But I think for the most people who kind of want to, again, control their own personal brand and share their work and in STEM especially, it does help a lot to be able to tell a story, to be able to write, or just share in different ways. Like content does really matter for these sort of things. But at the same time, I have seen people who don't really share anything at all. And they've done wildly well. Like, so there is obviously, you know, outliers in the situation, but I think that you're increasing your odds a lot by just learning how to write and learning how to communicate what you're working on, and building a following as well. And not even on, like, in my opinion, I think building a following on Twitter is a lot more valuable than on LinkedIn. So yeah. Being able to do that is really effective. Like there's someone I know called Jordan Singer. He's a designer at Cash App, and he has a lot of these side projects. You guys can see him on Twitter. He's cool. And he writes about, he has like a newsletter on Substack, I think. And he writes about it every month, like things he's worked on. And he has like 50,000 followers. Like, and Jack Dorsey follows him. So it's literally just sharing his work. People love it. It gets better, even though it's hard in the beginning to kind of share your work and expose yourself to criticism, but it does go a long way. And
just, you know, going back to that storyteller narrative, how do you use LinkedIn to like show your personal brand? Or are you more on like Twitter, Instagram? What do you do?
I don't really go on LinkedIn that much. I do, again, like do the occasional like update my job status or I might like a post or two. The main thing I usually use it for is to see if I want to reach out to someone it's a good way of knowing their experience or what team they're working on at a company that I'm interested in, or just their path in general, because I'm curious. It's a really good way of knowing about people's backstory.
Mhm.
And but for the most part, I am on Twitter. Something that I've tried to do, and a lot of people do, but it is kind of hard. It's sharing your progress in terms of, like, if you're working on a project, you'll be like, I just started this, and you know, you kind of attach a screenshot or whatever, and talking to your followers in that way, and you do kind of build up a lot of. I have seen a lot of people grow their following that way, just on Twitter, and it's not as good as LinkedIn, I think, in showing you everything concisely, but it is a good way of just reaching out quickly to your followers, and I think you get more reach and more relevance as well. Because in LinkedIn, it doesn't feel very authentic.
Yeah, LinkedIn is more so like professional kind of feel, but I really don't ever feel connected to most of the people unless it's like people I know.
Yeah, and like those motivational posts are very oversaturated now. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
For sure.
it's kind of annoying.
Yeah, even in Instagram, you see these like occasional posts. It's like, quit your job, and
Yeah.
and if I was poor, I'd rather wake up in a Lamborghini or something like that.
Or like on Christmas, they'd post about like, oh, are you guys applying for jobs on Christmas? That's how you should get a job. Like, it's very corny.
Yeah,
stuff.
like it's yeah, I get what you mean. The kind of over hustler conditioning of LinkedIn and the startup world is probably more negative.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I definitely recommend. I mean, you should definitely build like your page. I think it's, and like a lot of employers, like if you're looking for internships and stuff, they do ask for your LinkedIn. So have it there, I guess. But I definitely feel more connected with Twitter and things like that, really. Or even writing directly, like on Medium or whatever, which I have done in the past. But then I would share it on Twitter. That's what I would do. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Last question before the 3 takeaways. Speaking of so-called high school, you mentioned the changes in the education system. I was going to actually ask you whether or not high schoolers should be preparing like their LinkedIn profiles from a kind of got your feeling of it. Do you think that there could be something up and coming, maybe as like an industry prediction? Do you think that is going to be another startup, or do you think there's going to be another profile web app, or do you think it's multi-platformed, whereby the education system could take a hint from the industry, like from like the general populace, in terms of preparing high school students to and recommend to them to be more active on social media from a career standpoint? So it's becoming more and more of an avenue of marketing, let's say, rather than one of leisure, because we sort of seen that social media has been used for both, right? You're seeing very active people on a leisure perspective, like people just posting pictures of their food, or we're seeing people be active on like selling their brand every single day, posting, whether it be people who are ambitious in fitness, showing a workout, or whatever the case may be. Do you think that people in high school or in just the education system should start, if you had to give them a recommendation, like whether it be LinkedIn first, or would it be emphasizing the importance of an online presence?
I wouldn't advocate against not. I wouldn't advocate for not starting a LinkedIn page, right? Like it's not going to take that much time to set it up to begin with, and it might go a long way for companies that are still kind of dependent on it or still look for it. And I do get the occasional DM of like offers and stuff, and that's pretty helpful as well. But my what I kind of wanted to say was that I don't think there's that much value in posting on it like daily, like to be like a LinkedIn person, you know. But for these high school people, like I think that is something that you should do. It'll take like 10 minutes or something. But after that, you know, the value kind of diminishes quickly.
Personally, I like to think of it as like an electronic resume. It's like a back.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of jobs that say like attach your resume or apply with LinkedIn. So they do use that as the resume sometimes. Yeah.
Sure. Do you have any, I want to update the audience on any future plans that you have in the short term, ending off 2020 in a good, strong way and starting off 2021 in some megalomaniac, massive moonshot? Is there anything lined up for you in terms of that?
So recently I did get an extension from Shopify, so I am technically going to start January 4th until April 30th. Also as an intern. And on this side, I am working on an app. It's still kind of very private beta, but essentially it's so Goodreads. I don't know if anyone here uses Goodreads, but it is kind of dying off. They say that it's kind of likely to close. So I'm trying to make an alternative that is a lot better in UI UX, because I did kind of become like I've become a reader over the past few months. And it is something that I would use, and a lot of people would use as well, I think, just based on people I reached out to. So just working on that on the side, and then Shopify, and yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to quickly mention? Have any topics or any coverage of anything that we spoken about to the podcast, whether it be something you wanted to touch up on before you gave your 3 takeaways, or no?
No, I think this was great, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So now is our recurring segment. What are your 3 takeaways that you'd like to give to our Gen Z audience or anyone listening to our podcast?
Sure. So these takeaways are something that would have helped me a long time ago, personally, I think. So the first would be like, don't be afraid to share work publicly, especially if you're someone who designs or develops or is in STEM. There's a lot of value in sharing your work publicly. I think you get a lot of opportunities. And again, the audience thing that we talked about before on Twitter and stuff, there's a lot of value in sharing publicly. And the second thing would be, if there's something you want to learn that seems kind of scary in the beginning, don't be afraid to just start by doing. So just dive into it and start doing like small tasks. And I think learning by doing goes a long way. Especially if you build something, I think building is the best way to learn, really. And lastly, it would be resourceful, I think. And this doesn't just go to kind of, your field or whatever, but also reaching out to people. There have been a lot of times where, I keep talking about Twitter, but DMing to people on Twitter can go a long way. Like engineers at companies that you want to intern at, a lot of people are applying online. If you DM them on their Twitter, it's very likely they'll reply, and things like that do go a long way. And I think there's a lot of benefit in just kind of going extra, really.
And you want to tell the audience where they can find you on social media or anywhere else?
So I'm on a couple of platforms, but if you go on my website, you'll find the links for all of them. It's mohammedibrahim.ca, because the usernames are kind of weird. So.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for coming on today and giving us, sharing your time with us, and giving us truly enlightening conversation and insight into startup culture, developer culture, and just self-education and self-hacking.
For sure. No worries. Thanks for having me.
Well, take care.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Good luck with your future endeavors.
All right. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Check us out for an audio-only experience on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other outlets. Follow us on all of our social media, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. All of these links will be in the description. That's it for us today. Welcome to the new world.